Welcome to Recovery with Root, a podcast centered on topics surrounding mental health and addiction. Through our Advanced Recovery Institute, a new entity of the Root Center for Advanced Recovery, we are committed to research and training to elevate clinical care. We hope you find this podcast informative, and most of all, we hope that it helps improve the lives of others. Remember, we're in this together, and recovery is possible. Hello and welcome back to another episode of Recovery with Root. I'm Margot Farrell, Chief of Staff here at the Root Center for Advanced Recovery. Very excited for today's episode, joined by Amelia Nagoski. She is one of the authors for Burnout, The Secret to Unlocking the Stress Cycle. A little bit about Amelia. She is a DMA, so that stands for Doctorate of Musical Arts. She was an associate professor and coordinator of music up at Western New England University, so just a little bit further north than us here in Connecticut. She joins us now to talk to us about this book. Amelia, thank you so much for being here today.
Thanks, it's my pleasure.
I am in the midst of reading this book, and I have to say it speaks to me wholly. I think a lot of women out there, I know that this book specifically tailored for women, but anybody really who feels that they've experienced overwhelm or exhaustion, but still having to kind of do the day-to-day of things and get things done. So I guess just give me a little background on what got you to write this book and a little bit about it for anybody who's unfamiliar.
It all began when my sister was writing her first New York Times bestselling book, Come As You Are, The Surprising New Science That Will Transform Your Sex Life. And in this book about the science of women's sexuality, she wrote like one chapter that had a part of it that was about managing stress and feelings. And when she went, all around the world talking to women about the science of women's sexuality, they would come up to her and be like, yeah, the book is awesome. Thanks so much for this. All that sex science is great. But you know what really helped me was that one part about stress and feelings. And, she came home and she's telling me, gosh, it's so surprising. I mean, I worked so hard on the sex science. Why is this the thing? And I reminded her that stuff about how to feel your feelings and process your emotions was stuff that I had learned in conservatory training as a classical musician. So I knew it was a learned skill that was valuable to learn. The thing that I didn't learn in conservatory training is that I could apply that in my daily life. And when I learned that skill, it saved my life twice. So when I reminded Emily of that, she said, we should write a book about that. And that book was Burnout.
And that's so interesting. You wrote the book with your sister and you both have, different backgrounds. So she has more of that kind of clinical and counseling background and you have this music background, but it really has blended together to tell a beautiful story. As you're saying, sometimes you think like it may not be stereotypical, you think of music, but it has all these other outside applications that you're able to talk about those feelings. And as I was reading it, I thought, there's a bunch of things that stood out to me, but the stress versus the stressor. Let's talk about that a little bit. Can you break that down for folks? Because I think sometimes, at least for me prior to reading it, I think I lumped those two together. Explain that concept for folks.
Yeah, that was a really important idea for me in my recovery from very intense burnout. Was coming to understand that what actually stress is. When you can name a thing specifically, it really helps you think and talk about it in a way that's more helpful. So I kind of had the idea that like stress was like an idea or a feeling that kind of existed outside of me. It just was a thing. And then I learned how to think about it like stress is an experience that happens in my body. It's a physiological cycle that has a beginning, a middle, and an end. And that cycle is initiated by mostly external factors, although it can also be initiated by internal experiences. But in general, it was designed to help you respond to external threats. So like in the environment of evolutionary adaptiveness, the kind of thing that would initiate a stress response would be like a saber-toothed tiger coming to eat you. And your body responds with a cascade of neurotransmitters like adrenaline and cortisol and glucocorticoids to prepare you to save your life. And then you can use all of that preparation to fight or flight, run, jump, leap, climb. And then when you get yourself to safety and you look out and the tiger is gone, satisfied that you have left its territory and you have used up all of that response that your body prepared you for, it feels different. It feels Well, I mean, it's the complete cycle. So that's why we call it the stress cycle. But it's the experience that happens in your body. So the two separate things are the stress response, stress itself, the cycle that happens in your body, versus the thing that initiates a stress response. And when you separate them, the very good news is that you can manage stress in your body even when the thing that has initiated your stress hasn't gone away yet. So for me, I was in my doctoral program when I burned out really hard. Um, and I thought the whole time I was in my it took me 5 years to finish my doctorate. And I thought, for the first 3 years, I'll just plow through and I'll graduate and I'll be fine when I finish. But then after this hospitalization from stress-induced illness, I learned about the difference between stress and the stressor. And I learned that I could start to feel better right now, which would make it so much easier actually to finish my degree. It would keep me healthy enough to be able to finish my degree so that then the stressor would go away, but I didn't have to wait for that before I started addressing what was happening to my body.
Well, and that's another great point, that you mentioned, and that kind of was like a light bulb moment is a lot of times we think, I'll feel better when this
Yep.
class is over, when this meeting is done, when this project is accomplished. But then you guys talk about I believe it was 6 key ways that you can complete that cycle. Because I think what a lot of, I'm guilty of, I'm sure a lot of people are guilty of, is that you think just because, okay, well, I got through that stressful meeting, now I'm done. But you didn't
Right.
complete the cycle and it's still kind of lingering there. Talk a little bit about that and really the importance of finishing the cycle. Because that was also another moment where I was like, I am just moving on from the stress, but I haven't come to
Right.
terms with it.
Yeah. In the environment of evolutionary adaptiveness, where the stress response was created in animals like us, um, that threat was something we could fight or flee from. And in the 21st century, mostly the things that initiate the stress response cycle for us cannot be fought or fled from. There are things that we have to like be polite to our boss. We have to smile and not run into the guy in traffic who just cut us off. We have to be nice. And like that's good for society that we not, use our fight response to deal with our problems. That is correct. And that's how it should be. However, our bodies still have these responses. So we need to do something to tell our bodies that it has the capacity to move us from danger to safety. So, yeah, we need to complete the stress response cycle. Nowadays, we need to do it in a separate process from the process we use to deal with the thing that causes the stress response cycle. And yeah, there are lots and lots of ways to do that. The most effective on a population level is physical activity. Because when you're being chased by a saber-toothed tiger, what do? You run. So it could be running, leap, it could be elliptical machine, it could be dancing it out in your kitchen to Beyonce. It could be just laying in bed and tensing all of the muscles in your body as hard as you can and then holding it a little bit longer than you think you can and then letting it go. Anything that tells your body that it succeeded and completed an action, that's the thing your body's probably going to expect the most. This is not remotely true for everyone. There are lots of reasons why physical activity might not be it for you. So if you've been trying to manage your stress with exercise and turns out it hasn't been helping, guess what? Some people just aren't natural exercisers and it's not going to help them as much. My identical twin sister, who I wrote this book with, is a natural exerciser. She could go on the worst day, the most stressful, horrible day she has. She goes for a bike ride and she's up the hills of Pennsylvania with the clouds and the cows and the mushroom farms, and she can feel like at one with the big blue sky and come home, and it's like the weight of the world is lifted off her shoulders. And I thought she was making that up. I thought it was like, I don't know, propaganda. Turns out some people just vary. Her identical twin, raised in the same household, have never had that experience. Physical activity is not the completer of stress response cycles for me the way it is for her. And it turns out people just vary. So the good news is there are so many other ways you can complete a stress response cycle. For me, the way that really did it was imagination. You can participate in media or imagine your own story where you are. How I discovered it was this. I was on the elliptical machine because I was always doing what I was told. You go to the gym, you work out, you're supposed to. It didn't do the stress thing for me, but I was going anyway. So when I learned that imagination could complete a stress response cycle, I got on the elliptical machine and I imagined myself as Godzilla, like tromping on, I'm going to be honest, it was the University of Connecticut where I was getting my doctoral degree. And I'm like on the parking lots and like all the way to the bursar's office and like trying to like, yeah. So I imagined myself as Godzilla. I hadn't done anything new with my body. I just changed what happened in my imagination while I was using my body. And I got off the elliptical machine and I felt for the first time ever like powerful and ready for the next thing. And it was the complete stress response cycle. You can also do that if a movie makes you feel like you want to like stand up and cheer or sob your eyes out, or if there's a book that you look up from reading it and you feel like you've emerged into a completely different world because you were so enraptured with it. That means that your imagination has guided you through a stress response, and even if your body was just sitting on the couch, right? A really exciting video game. You're only moving your thumbs, but your whole body is tense and doing the thing. And at the end, you're like, I rescued the princess or whatever it is. It changes your physiology because your mind doesn't really know the difference between things that are really happening and things that you're imagining are happening. So very similar like neural responses go on, whether it's actually happening or happening in your mind. You can complete a stress response cycle that way. So creative that was imagination, physical activity, creative self-expression as a musician, of course. I was very familiar with the ways that making music or even drawing when I was a kid was an outlet for me. They call the creative arts like a creative outlet because one of the things it does is use up your focus and your energy and pour it out someplace safe outside of you. A great big belly laugh where you're just like kind of out of control laughing till like you're kind of like your cheeks hurt and your stomach hurts from contracting. That can also move you through a stress response cycle. A big old cry as it like can just purge out all of the feelings that were stuck in there. There's lots and lots of ways to complete a stress response cycle.
And it's so interesting, so ironically, yesterday I was feeling a little bit stressed and I was also reading the book and it was at the part of talking about physical activity. And I would consider myself a natural exerciser. But yesterday I did not want to. And it was the part about the consistency and how like if you know that that helps you just doing it. And I put the book down and I said, okay, we're just going to do 30 minutes because I know that it's the consistency. And I've recently noticed that in changing my mindset towards activity, because I think with women too, that, women of a certain generation grew up with the mindset that working out was done to punish yourself, to look a certain way. So for some people, it can cause anxiety. And, I
Yes.
almost found it like very cathartic to read this and to be reaffirmed that like, you're not exercising for anything but the muscle that's in between your earlobes, like your
Yeah.
brain. You're
Yeah.
exercising for your brain. And I
Yeah.
think having people realize that, like, what's the biggest way to get through to specifically women? Because I know this book is targeted for women. To having them understand that difference, because a lot of times exercise has been shoved at women for very, very different reasons.
Yes. Yeah. When we talk about consistency, the good of doing the thing that you know works for you over and over again is that we all have experiences of stress every day, often multiple times a day, sometimes just chronically, ongoing. And the good news is that we can complete stress cycles that were initiated a decade ago by just like doing the thing over and over again, and gradually our body releases the leftover old stuff. That's the value of doing the same thing over and over again. When we talk about exercise as the thing we do over and over again, yeah. One of the reasons exercise doesn't work as a stress reliever, especially for people who were born in female bodies, the gets really complicated because we are told that exercise is a thing we have to do, that it is, our duty and our obligation to the world to be thin, as if there's any evidence that exercising makes you thin. There is no evidence that exercise makes you thin. In general, talking about body image and the way that the external forces require women to conform to a very narrow socially constructed ideal is a big old mess. But in terms of women and their relationship to exercise, sometimes that mental block that comes from like, I'm doing this because I have to, because I'm supposed to be, you know, losing weight or getting healthy or however they frame it. The truth is that no matter how you change your body, it will never be good enough for the external world. Eventually you'll be too thin or not toned enough or too muscular. Like there literally is no way to make the world happy with your body. The only way to be happy with your body is for you to decide that your body is worthy of love just the way it is. But until you get comfortable with that, if you're doing the exercise for the purpose of, as you say, punishing yourself or trying to make your body conform, then that can initiate a stress response. So this thing that you're doing that could be a way of completing a stress response could be instead be initiating the stress response. Does that make sense?
Oh yeah, and I think that there's, yeah, that's why I hope that, people who listen to this and who may have that kind of toxic relationship with exercise can start to heal that relationship and see and change that mindset on it and being like, oh, this is for my head, but nothing else but for my head, for my
Yeah.
mind, for my emotions.
Yeah.
And I feel like that could be really cathartic for a lot of people because I feel like, exercise being spoken about in that dialogue is just not that common. It's, I mean,
Yeah.
it's not that the conversation is not about that. It's starting to shed a little bit of light on that. But like reading that was almost like for someone, my background was in athletics for a long time. Like that was like healing to see, like, okay, we're just doing this to feel good mentally. And
Right.
then everything else kind of falls into place as well. So I almost found that to be a really, there was a lot of different things. I was like, oh my God, that resonates. Um,
Yeah,
that could be
absolutely.
really
And
cathartic for women.
I can't, I, it's not like I can say, well, turns out exercise is not good for you because it is probably, but it's also when you talk about it that way, like of this is how you physical activity is the answer. That really leaves out a lot of people for whom physical activity A doesn't work, or B, they don't have access to it because of physical disabilities or because of like life circumstances where, again, if you're taking a walk to like de-stress and on that walk you get catcalled, and now the thing that was supposed to help you complete a stress response cycle instead has initiated a stress response cycle. Or there are people who don't have access because of their physical abilities, have changed throughout their life, or because they have never had physical access to it. So, in order to be like really inclusive of everybody, you need to remember that anything that is true for one person is true for one person. And things can be true. Science can demonstrate this is true at a population level. But if that thing is not true for you, that doesn't mean that you are broken. It just means that you are different from an average of people. It doesn't mean that the science is wrong either. It's just that the science can only account for averages, not your actual experience. You're the only one who knows what's the thing that works for you. What's the thing that makes you feel, yeah, safe and like ready for the next thing.
And I love that you guys, went over those things so that, sometimes, like, especially on social media, you'll hear that in certain influencers or people in the wellness industry will kind of force that on you. And it seems like they're giving you a very, very narrow set of things to try.
Yeah,
And, you're talking about also breathing, just like your breathing techniques.
absolutely.
You're talking about a hug and how much like that physical connection component, like you're giving other options. So it doesn't feel like, well, I don't exercise or that doesn't work for me. So does that mean that I'm stuck in this stress cycle forever?
Yeah. Yeah, there are so many ways to complete the stress response cycle. The ones we talk about in the book are the ones that are evidence based because we only felt comfortable talking about something we could demonstrate with like some peer reviewed research. Like, as you say, the one I haven't talked about is affection. Having a loving connection with someone or something can help tell your body that it is safe. Whereas, usually, like in those kind of influencer type circumstances, it's either somebody who's being paid to sell a thing, or it's someone who has found something that works for them and they're a zealot for it and they think that, well, if it worked for me, it'll work for everybody. And that's just not true.
Yeah, no. And, I think another key component is that we realize that stress isn't bad. It's staying stressed that's bad. And
Yeah.
you know from experience.
Oh, yeah. No, our bodies are meant to handle stress. Sometimes we've like taught courses and stuff, and women come in and they have the goal of like, I just want peace. I just want to be at peace. How do I do that? And the answer is that would be really boring to be at peace all the time. Our bodies are designed to handle stress. Our bodies enjoy some stress. That's why people like scary movies and like roller coasters and stuff. Like, we enjoy a little bit of stress. And in fact, stress is not dangerous. Our bodies can handle it, our minds enjoy it. The thing that is dangerous is getting stuck. Uh, and in this world that's kind of backwards and upside down from the environment of evolutionary adaptiveness, it has occurred that we are more likely to suffer injury and illness due to the stress stuck in our bodies than we are to suffer injury and illness from a thing that initiates our stress, right? No more saber-toothed tigers, right? Now it's just that constant flood of adrenaline, the constant increase in blood pressure, the constant, shutting down of our immune systems. These are all part of the stress response, and they are dangerous long term.
Yeah, and I think that's sometimes people don't realize. They think, oh, if I eat unhealthy, that can cause me to get sick. If I do, that you have these tangible things, but
Yeah.
not realizing that our thoughts and what we put our bodies through internally and mentally can have a very real physical reaction. I mean, I think the concept of burnout is a little bit ambiguous. Like, it's like, well, what do you mean? I can't see it, but you can
Yeah.
feel it. What would you say to someone who's like unsure, like, is that what I'm going through? Like, what are some key things to look out for?
It's important to know that burnout is not a mental illness. It's not a medical diagnosis of any kind. Burnout's a condition that results from a constant chasm between who you are and who the world expects you to be, what the world wants from you. So if you are working a job where you're expected to work 70 hours a week, that's not physically possible to sustain in the long term because you will not have access to the amount of rest that is required to be a healthy human being. That's just the very plain illustrated version. Um, so if you're under that circumstance where you're constantly striving to achieve a thing and feeling like I'm not going to be able to have a paycheck if I don't do this, I'm not going to be able to feed myself and my family or keep a roof over our heads, that constant state of stress. So for one very specific example, when we feel that stress, one of the things that changes is our circulatory system. So our heart beats faster and harder, our blood pressure increases, and our vascular systems are intended to carry a gently flowing stream, right? So, boom, 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 our heart beats, the blood flows, no problem. We see a saber-toothed tiger, boom, 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 boom. Heart races, blood pressure pounds, we run, we leap, we jump, we climb, we use up all of the neurochemicals that have told our bodies to have this response, and the blood pressure goes back to normal. So it was like 10 minutes of pounding. And that 10 minutes does a little bit of damage to the vascular system, to the blood vessels themselves. And that's no problem if it's for 10 minutes and then nothing again until the next week, because that gives the blood vessels time to heal. But when our blood pressure is raised chronically all the time because we wake up and we have an email from our boss, and then our kids aren't ready for school on time, and then there's too much traffic getting to the office, and et cetera, and the stressors keep adding up, then our blood pressure is raised chronically, and that fire hose now, instead of a gently flowing stream, does damage to our vascular system that never has a chance to heal. And that's how, little chasms get dug into the blood vessels. And that's where plaques form. And that's how stress can cause a heart attack.
It's almost like, you hear that and you're like, oh, okay, now I get it. But like, we do it to ourselves on a daily basis. And it's like, it makes sense in theory. But what do you think is the biggest takeaway, or how someone can actively, like, they listen to this? What's the biggest takeaway you want for them, or the way that they can implement it? Because it's like sometimes you think like, okay, today I'm going to do better at managing my stress. Then you get that email, and it's like, what do I do to stop that from when I can feel it happening?
In the moment when you feel it happening, it's usually hard to do the thing that will manage the stress because you have to deal with the thing that causes the stress first, usually in that situation. Or lots of things get in the way. Evidence based, very simple, not like wow effective, but low-key effective in a moment when you really just need to change the stress response is a long, slow, deep breath. Literally a long exhalation. Exhalation engages the parasympathetic rest and digest part of the nervous system. Inhalation activates the sympathetic fight or flight, and exhalation is the parasympathetic. And in addition to just taking that slow, deep breath and exhaling a long, slow exhale, is remembering and paying attention to the idea that I'm inhaling, sympathetic, exhaling, parasympathetic, and the natural existence of my body, my human meat suit that I walk around in, is um, a state of action. So we say in the book, the definition of wellness is not a state of mind or a state of being. Wellness is a state of action. It's the freedom to oscillate through all the cycles of being human, from stressed to relaxed, from hungry to satiated, from thirsty to hydrated, from autonomy to connectedness. No one is meant to stay in one state forever. We are designed to feel all of the things, and it is when we have freedom to access the opposites and the cycles that we start to feel well. So in that moment, inhale and exhale, remember that you are made of cycles, and whatever the thing is that makes you feel like, I'm unstressed, I feel safe, I feel ready for the next thing. Whatever that thing is, do that thing on the regular, and it'll gradually chip away at that backlog of incomplete stress response cycles.
Well, and because you mentioned it, and that was gonna be my next point, is you mentioned about, wellness and what exactly that is. And wellness is when you can feel safe in your body and knowing that that feeling is safe. So maybe you still have that triggering email, maybe you're still in traffic, but changing the dialogue so that you know that still in your meat suit, as you called it, you are safe in that meat suit, that you are safe in what you're doing and in your body, and you can still come back to that breath, that ultimately that's what you can control.
Yes, it is difficult in a world where, in a world that is not safe for a lot of people under a lot of circumstances. And the less you conform to a very narrow, socially constructed ideal, the less safe you are. So humans are a herd species. We are designed to live in community with each other. And when you're in the herd and the lion's coming, where's the safest place to be? The middle of the herd. Members of the herd who are on the fringes, literally on the fringes, are the ones who get attacked by the lion. And in the world we live in, those who are on the fringes of society are literally, physically, in more danger, not from lions, but they are the ones who are denied access to resources that they might need, and they're definitely not going to be as easily able to access positions of power where they could make large-scale changes to, like, government policy that would make them safe. So when the world is not a safe place, it gets more complicated. And these days, people are under even more stress than ever because they're feeling like they're not safe. And like, I can't say that they're wrong. But what I can say is that you are safe in your body. Nothing that you feel is ever going to hurt you. You might feel a thing as a result of being hurt, but any anger that you feel can't hurt you. Any grief that you feel, any fear that you feel cannot hurt you. So when you feel the feeling, your body knows that it has access to moving through the cycle, and that makes your body feel like a safe place. So the world is not super safe, but you in your body can, especially if you ignore the big herd, ignore the Instagram herd and the HGTV herd, and instead you surround yourself with your own herd. In the book, we call it the bubble of love because it's fun to say and feels true. When you surround yourself with your own herd of people who care about your well-being as much as you care about theirs, then you can remember, I might be on the fringes of this large-scale herd, but I am surrounded immediately by a community of people who remind me that I am worthy as love just as I am. I don't need to change anything. I mean, I can have my, avocado green kitchen countertops, and people are going to come over my house and not like hate and scorn me because I don't have a white kitchen. No, they're going to come into my house and we're going to gather around my avocado green countertops and have a meal together. And that connectedness, that love, that is where I am safe.
And also those feelings, that feeling of anxiety, that feeling of anger, that feeling of sadness, it's a reaffirmation that you are alive, that you are actively being a participant in this life as well.
Yeah.
So it's, if you can shift it as well to be like, okay, me having this anxious feeling is also showing that I care about
Yes.
whatever the initiative is that's making you feel that.
Yeah. Those feelings are not harmful or dangerous. Um, One of the first things Emily gave me when I was the first time I was hospitalized with stress induced illness, my sister brought me a book of meditations by Steve Crevette called Complete Relaxation. And in it, one of the things to do is when you feel the feeling, um, like anger, you can say, I'm angry and I love feeling angry, or I'm afraid and I love feeling afraid. And reminding yourself that I love feeling this feeling. It means I'm human. It means I have access to this feeling, and I will also have access to peace later on.
Because no emotion, what is it? I think they say like 90 seconds is like the standard amount of time that it takes for an emotion to pass through. Anything past that is what you're associating onto it or adding onto it.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yes. This is a thing that I had to learn. We talk about how stress is a cycle, but stress is just one emotion. All emotions are cycles. They're like cascades of neurotransmitters that we have limited capacity to produce. We can't be producing all those neurochemicals all the time. It would take too much energy. It would be exhausting. Um, so I, for example, had to learn in a therapist's office how to cry because I thought when a thing goes wrong that makes me want to cry, I'm going to cry forever until the thing is gone, until the external cause is gone, because I would be thinking about the thing the whole time. But what I learned is that if you put aside the thoughts about the thing, put them just in a box, in a closet in your mind for later, you're going to deal with that problem later. Right now, you're going to turn toward the feeling that was caused by that thing. And you're going to go ahead and feel the feelings. You're going to think about how hot am I? How tense am I? How many ounces of fluids are leaking out of my face right now? And without judging or evaluating that experience, you're just going to notice it. And as you turn your attention toward the experience without feeding it more thoughts about whatever initiated it, it passes, it goes away. It's a cycle. And if it doesn't, then the next step is to reach out for help, for that community in the bubble of love.
Well, and that's what I was going to say is that, I think the ultimate takeaway here is that folks realizing, and we say it, and it sounds cliche, but you're not alone and there are resources to help. There are books, there are therapists, there are people out there, there are, hotlines to call, there are things out there to do. Because I think
Yes.
sometimes people can feel like, that was going to be my next question is like, what would you tell folks to do next? Obviously I want them to get burnout, to read Burnout. But what would be your, what do you want folks to know?
You're exactly right that reaching out for help is a really good thing to do. People think that it's weakness or it's a failure if you need help. But no, humans are a herd species. Jonathan Haidt describes humans as 90% chimp, 10% bee. We're a hive species. We're built to do great things together, not alone. So needing help doesn't mean you're a failure as a human being. It means you are a human being and you have a need that is not being met. Like you're starving and you need food, you're lonely and you need company. It's a biological necessity for humans. We we need help from each other. No person in the world like grows just food for themselves and feeds themselves. No. How humans have always existed since the beginning of society is we collaborate so that some people do this over here and some people do that over there, and we combine resources and we share and we support each other. That is how humanity thrives. So how we phrase it in the book is that burnout cannot be cured by self-care, because you're always going to be, no matter how well you do you grow your own food and you sleep as much as you need to and you get all the physical activity and eat all the vegetables, like you can do all that for yourself, but you're still living in a culture that tells you you're not good enough, you're not thin enough, you're too anxious, you're too high strung, you're too quiet. Like, no matter what you are, the world's going to tell you you need to change something about yourself. And existing in that tide is impossible. You need to be surrounded by the people who are going to also be resisting that tide together with you. And together you can stand and thrive. But alone, it just is impossible. So that's why we say in the book that the cure for burnout is all of us caring for each other.
I love that. That's a great note to end on. So with that, tell folks the easiest way to get a hold of your book and if they want to learn more and get in contact with you.
The book is everywhere. Emily and I are currently doing a podcast called The Feminist Survival Project, the Zombie Apocalypse Edition. We did a Feminist Survival Project 2020 back starting actually in 2019. And we decided to start it again because people were like, hey, how about you do that again? So that's a Feminist Survival Project. And the book is just everywhere.
Amazon, all of them. I know.
We have an audiobook also.
Yep, as well.
Which I am very proud of because my husband plays the piano underscoring and he's a genius. And we also now have, after Burnout came, it's 80,000 words with 26 pages of references. That's not everybody's jam, we discovered. Surprise. So we now also have a workbook. So if you're like, I don't need all those receipts, I don't need the studies, I don't need the citations, I just want to feel better right now, results, not receipts, that's the workbook is for you.
Yeah, the TLDR little recaps at the end of the chapters is
Yes.
very nice too. Yes. No, it's, and like what you're saying with, the ways to end the cycle, there's different ways that this will work for everybody. If you want to listen, if you want to read, if you want the nuggets,
Yes.
podcast. So that's awesome. Amelia, I thank you so much. I hope to one day meet your sister. You guys are fabulous. And it's such a great read. And I know that many folks who are listening to this will definitely benefit from it. So what a pleasure. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you.
Well, we hope you enjoyed this episode of our podcast, Recovery with Ruth. As always, stay connected with us on social media to learn about when next podcast episodes will drop. You can comment, ask questions, even let us know about future topics that you'd like to see discussed. Until next time, remember, progress is the destination.